Welcome to this presentation in which I explain how to calculate your grade and how I go about curving grades. This is going to cover both topics because I find that sometimes students have a question about one or the other topic. So if you have a question about only one of those issues, you may want to fast forward through portions of this video and get to the part that you're most interested in. I'm going to begin by talking about how to calculate your individual grade, and then I'll talk about the topic of curving. To calculate your individual grade, you'll need to go to the syllabus for your particular course. I've pulled up an example of a syllabus that I use, and what I would do is I would scroll until I get to the formula section. On this example, it's on page 4 of 7 pages. It's typically going to be near the end, pretty close to where we go through the week-by-week breakdown. And you can see here for this particular syllabus, the textbook reading activity is 15%, assignments are 15%, quizzes are 15%, tests are 30%, and the final examination is 15%. What is included in this equation is going to differ based upon the class that we're in, and what these numbers are going to differ. But one thing you know is that this total here is going to add up to 100 because obviously we need 100% of the points to be allocated. So let me show you an example about how you would take an equation like this and compare that to your grades. Now before we get started, I sometimes get a question, why don't you let Canvas calculate grades? It is true that in many of my classes, I don't program Canvas to calculate your grades correctly for you. I don't do that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that Canvas doesn't know how and if I'm going to finally curve grades. And I have curved grades for virtually all of my classes throughout my career teaching here, and I've been teaching here for many, many years. So the information, the equation that Canvas would use would not fully capture the grade calculation process. So that's one reason, but really that's not the main reason. The main reason is that the way I establish grades is a pretty complicated system. And it is a system that evolves sometimes as the semester progresses. And so therefore, Canvas just isn't robust enough, and this isn't any criticism of Canvas. Canvas is really, really awesome, but it's not robust enough to allow me to fully capture the information. For example, I might have 10 assignments, and I might drop the lowest 2 assignments, or I might allow an extra credit assignment to replace one of the assignments, or I might allow a retest for a particular class. I don't do any of these things every semester. I don't do any of those things in many of my classes, but those are things I have done, and Canvas wouldn't be able to calculate under those circumstances. And so as soon as I were to throw in one of those surprise developments, the Canvas system would essentially not make sense anymore. And when I've done that in the past and made these changes of dropping grades or allowing other things to happen, students would become very concerned. Wait, my grade seems so low. And they would be responding to Canvas's calculation, which was not correct. For example, imagine that in a particular class, students take 3 tests. But I tell students from the very beginning, I'm going to drop the lowest of the 3 tests. Well, a particular student chooses not to take the second test. She does very well in the first test and the third test. It's fine she didn't come to the second test because I'm going to drop the lowest of the 3 test grades. She's still on track for an A, and yet that 0 Canvas doesn't know shouldn't be included in the calculation. And so as a result, Canvas is going to tell her that she has probably a B or a C as a result, and that's going to worry her when there's really no need for it to be of a source of concern for her at this time. So for those reasons, I usually don't let Canvas actually calculate the grade. And that means that if you want to do the calculation, you'll need to actually crunch the numbers. And that's what I'm going to show you today. But before I crunch any numbers, please know that you don't ever have to do this. It's my job to calculate your grade. If you would like to calculate it, great, wonderful. You have all the information that you'll need to be successful at that. But it's not your job to. And so if you want to say, you know what, I see what my grades are, I have a ballpark sense of where I am, Groover will take care of it from here on out. That's perfectly fine. If you would like to come to my office hours to discuss how you calculate your grades, I am glad to sit down with you, crunch some numbers for you, show you how that works as well. So those are some options for you. But let me show you just an example about how you might calculate your grades in a mythical class. So here we have, this is the formula for an example syllabus. You can see that we have several assignments this semester and they add up in total to 50%. And this particular class, we also have a midterm that's worth 25%, and we have a final examination that's worth 25%. So we're going to consider this student named Chris. There were 3 assignments, and Chris got a 100 out of 100, an 80 out of 100, and a 90 out of 100. In other words, Chris got a 90, an 80, and an 100, an 80, and a 90 on these assignments. The reason why I listed it of 100 out of 100 is sometimes I do assignments, 20 out of 30 or something like that. And so under those circumstances, you would need to keep in mind that it's not 20 out of 100, it's 20 out of 30. But I'm going to make this one easy. So obviously if there was a 20 out of 30 situation, you look at this differently. So what you do is you take the, let me just put this in kind of blue here. You take the numerators of our fractions here and add them together. So 100 plus 80 plus 90. You add these 3 numbers together. You divide by 3 because we have a total of 3 numbers to get the average of 90. And so now our number is 90 out of 100. Now if it were say 9 out of 30, then we'd have to perhaps adjust this so it would be out of 100, but because it's already out of 100, we don't need to make that adjustment. If you need some help when the number isn't out of 100 possible points, come see me and I'll be glad to assist with that. So we know this is our assignments column, and we know that assignments are worth 50% of the grade. So now I'm going to show you how to calculate the weighted part for that grade. So we know it's 90 out of 100. So we take 90 times 50%, which of course is 0.50, this number turned into a decimal. And that, of course, is 45 points. 90 times 0.5 is 45. On the midterm, Chris got an 80 out of 100. I virtually always do tests out of 100 points, so this one's pretty straightforward, and that's almost certainly the type of grade that you will see. Sometimes I allow a test to have extra points. For example, it might have been possible to get 103 on a test. Even in those circumstances, though, I will have it out of 100. The extra 3 points would be considered extra credit. So if, let's say, you did really great on a test and you got 103, you got a perfect score, the maximum score was 103 and you got 103. That's not what you should put here. You should actually put 103 out of 100 because those extra points are literally extra credit. So now I look here and I see midterm is worth 25% of my grade. So I put the 80 here that Chris earned, multiply it by 25% or 2.5, and that gives me 20. So we have a 45 here. Let me just put this in, we'll put it in pink. And we have a 20, which is in pink. Chris didn't do quite as well on the final. He got she got a 70, because we don't know what the gender is of Chris. And so now we're going to take that and multiply by 25%, and that gives us 17.5. So we add 45 plus 20 plus 17, these numbers right here, and we can see that Chris ended up with an 82.5. And we know that that works out to be a B in most cases. But of course, we don't know what the curve is for this class. The way that I do curves will be the next section. So now we're ready to switch on over and talk about curving. So here we have a more complete class. Obviously, it's not a full class, and I'll be honest, I've come up with numbers that are pretty simple to work with. These don't necessarily reflect the types of grades that students ordinarily have. We can see our first student, Angie, has, she got 100, her average grade on the assignments, and obviously she must have gotten 100, 100, and 100 if there were 3 assignments. And then she got 100 on the midterm and 100 on the final exam. Poor Bob only got a 50 on the assignments on average. He only got a 50 on the midterm and a 50 on the final exam. So you can see as we go through all of the grades, you can see that virtually all of them are divisible by 10. That's not really realistic, but I wanted to keep the number simple so we could spend more time on the calculation and less time on doing some more challenging arithmetic. Okay, so we're going to take this 100 here and multiply it, just like we did with Chris, multiply it by 0.5. And of course, 100 times 0.5 is 50. So we did the same calculations for each one of these individuals that we did for Chris. And we ended up with here, let me go back and put this in here. Here we go. And so here are the average grades that we have for our students. Angie averaged out 100, Bob 50, Carla a 90, Dave a 69, Ed a 90, and Fiona a 44.5. So now we're ready to do the average. Now obviously if I weren't averaging, or excuse me, if I weren't curving the grades, we'd say, well, Angie's getting an A. Let me just write that here. Angie's getting an A, and Bob's he's getting an F, and Carla's getting a, and Dave is getting a D, and Ed is getting an A, and Fiona's getting an F. That's what we would kind of think was going to happen with our students under these circumstances. But that's probably not what's actually going to happen with our students. Let's first of all look at our students. We can see that all of our students submitted all of the assignment. And they may have, it's possible, especially for Bob and Fiona, it's possible that maybe they got low grades for assignments because they didn't submit them all. But they at least gave them a shot. They did an okay job. They were certainly participating in the assignments. And everybody took the midterm. But when we get to the final examination grade, we see that Fiona did not show up for the final examination. So I call someone like Fiona, I call her a not persistent student. I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean, my goodness, Fiona may have won the lottery, and she may be, you know, or lounging on a beach somewhere, having a grand old time. So when I say she's not a persistent student, I don't mean that as an insult to Fiona. She might have a really awesome reason why she didn't complete this semester. But what I mean is, if I include her in the calculation of the overall grade, then she's going to weigh down the average pretty significantly. In her case, her average isn't super bad. It's 44.5. But many times I will have students who do virtually nothing in a class. Maybe they got sick, maybe they moved to a different city. Who knows what happened? I've had students that have had single digits or even zeros here. They never submitted anything. Obviously, if I include them in a class, especially a small class, you can see how maybe everyone else was getting A's and B's, but when I add the 1 or 2 people who weren't persistent, the average might drop dramatically. So I'm not going to include Fiona in my curve calculation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these numbers here. Let me just put them in, put them in blue. I'm going to take these numbers and come up with an average. And this is what I call, again, persistent students. Now you can see here, just because a student is considered persistent doesn't mean they're going to pass. In Bob's case, we can see he's definitely persistent. He has completed at least half of the assignments, and he's gotten a grade for the midterm and the final examination. So he is trying even if he's not passing. So what I've done is I've added the grades for all the students that are persistent students. In other words, I've excluded Fiona, and then I've divided that by the number of students in the class to come up with an average, and the average ended up to be 79.8. Now you'll notice I didn't do an average of all of the assignment grades or all the midterm grades or all the final examination grades. I just did it of the grand total. So you can see I'm not going to have this information until after the final examinations have been graded and I've taken the average of the grade. So this won't be until after all of the grades are in. Much too late for there to be any extra credit or any other assignments. So I can't tell you what the curve is going to be until it's really too late for you to do anything to affect your grade. So the overall class is 79.8. I want the average to be 83 or 84. And so you can see here, I need to add about 3 or 4 points to everybody's grade to get it to the range that I want. And that's what I've done. I've decided to curve the grade 4 points. So that means that the adjusted average for this class is going to be, I think I already have it here, 83.8. And now I've added those 4 points from here. Let me pick a color that's going to show up here. Those 4 points from here to each one of the scores. So 100 plus 4 is 104. 50 plus 4 is 54, and so on. And we can see that the extra points didn't really help Angie because she was already getting an A. And unfortunately, it didn't help Bob because he was already, he was failing. And it didn't help Carla because she already had an A as well. But Dave, it did help. He was getting a D and now he's getting a C. And it didn't help Ed either because he was already getting an A. And Fiona, even though she wasn't a persistent student, she also gets the benefit of the curve. She goes from 44.5 to 48.5. I'm sorry, I dropped off that digit there. So it doesn't get her to passing, but it could have. It's possible that if her grades had been higher earlier in the semester, that maybe she would have been, at 56 or something, and she might have been able to get up to passing. So this is how the grades will ultimately be. I do not publish my curve. I don't tell people, oh, I gave this class 4 points. I also don't publish I don't calculate the grades for individual students. You'll see all of the grades that you've earned on Canvas, but you won't see them within the equation. Again, I talked about that earlier about why I don't do that. But I don't publicize my curve, but let me give you some just general information about it. I have taught here for, let's see, at this point, I guess about 8 years full-time, and so I've been teaching, I would say probably I've taught about 100 classes, ballpark, and I have only had one class that I have not curved at least 1 point. And that class was kind of an anomaly. I ended up giving a lot of extra credit points, and it ended up causing students to have grades above that 83 or 84. As you can see, since it only happened once, it's probably not going to happen again. Usually my curve is between 1 and 5 points, probably 3, 4, 5 is the usual range. I have curved as much as 10 points, but again, that was a weird time as well. It was a very small class, and just for whatever reason, grades weren't as high in that class as usual. So generally speaking, if you have a 78, probably more likely than not you'll get a B. If you have a 69, probably more likely than not you'll get a C. If you have a 57, 3 points on top, it could go either way. If you have a 86, kind of a long shot, could happen, wouldn't count on it. If you have a 75, you probably got a C. So I don't publicize that, but that's kind of a range. 1 or 2 points is probably very likely. 3 and 4 is a little bit of a long shot, and 5 is really being optimistic. So anyway, I wanted to share this with you just so you could get some idea about how to calculate this. When it comes time to actually calculate your grades, if you choose to do so, then you're welcome to come by. You may want to review this video one more time. You're welcome to come by with any questions that you have. And again, I'm happy to help you crunch some numbers and see what numbers make sense. Let's just go back up to Chris for a second. Let's say that Chris is also in this class. Obviously, if Chris had been in the class, we would have had his or her name on this list. But let's just assume that he or she was in the class. And so we're going to add 4 points to Chris's score because Chris was in this class. So here we go. Oops, here we go. Okay, so in this case, it didn't help Chris. Chris has an 86.5, so Chris still has the B. But that would be how we would do the calculation if we were in Chris's situation. I hope that this information has been helpful for you. Again, if you have questions or concerns, please feel free to come by my office hours. I'm glad to sit down with you and go over various scenarios and figure out if you'd like to work through it and see, well, you know, what if I get an 80 on the final, or what if I get a 40 on the final, or whatever your particular concern might be. I thank you for your attention. I hope you have a great day. Take care.